I'm going to start with Judge Mukasey. I think just to talk about U.S. policy, let's put on the table the terrorism listing of the MEK, NCRI, PMOI. Judge, would you give us your perspective? We already heard from the then director of the FBI who said that they were never consulted. But what impact did it have? How would you assess the importance or quality of that decision to put them on the terrorism list? What impact did it have on people's lives? What impact did it have on U.S. policy and on the people who supported the NCRI, who were banned from sending any money to them or having contact with them for 15 entire years? And what can you tell us about the process of getting them off the list?
Well, let me give you my own perspective on that and my own experience with MEK, because in some ways it's kind of a microcosm of what happened there and of what the first two panels discussed, namely the impact of disinformation, which played a huge role in that listing, as well as what alternatives are available. My first introduction to MEK came when I left government. I got a visit in my office, by appointment, of course, with Ali Reza Jafarzadeh and a man named Nasser Rashidi, who came to see me about MEK, of which I had never heard. And they wanted to know whether I would be willing to consider voicing some support for this worthy organization. I knew the worthy people who were trying to overthrow the regime in Iran. And of course, if you talk about overthrowing the regime in Iran, that made me sit up and bark. Obviously, that was something I was fascinated by. They said, oh, by the way, we have to warn you. This organization is on the list of foreign terrorist organizations. And I did a double or triple take. I couldn't understand it. But I started to read the literature and agreed after a while to come to a meeting and speak. I had to travel to the meeting and my expenses had to be reimbursed. But I was told they couldn't be reimbursed by the MEK. They had to be reimbursed by some well-meaning member of the community who had no relationship or no direct relationship with MEK, so that I could avoid liability. Liability? I'm just going to go talk to an organization. This is the United States. I'm allowed to express myself. Take our word for it. In fact, consult a lawyer. So I consulted a lawyer. In fact, given what happened later on, that lawyer he won't be nameless, but I won't mention his name. He's a very former high-ranking attorney in the federal government for advice. And I was on the plane starting to go to the meeting. And he said, you know, I got some question about whether you really ought to go to this meeting and whether you ought to take the reimbursement for your expenses. I said, well, I'm on the plane. I've been reimbursed already. He said, well, put the money in an escrow account. So I put the money in an escrow account and I went to the meeting. Came back. I said, how did they get on the list of foreign terrorist organizations? Well, it appears that it happened in 1997. And it didn't happen because somebody at the State Department did research into the activities of MEK or NCRI or anybody or any other entity in the United States government. There was no cable from the CIA or other evidence. It happened kind of the way the demonstration got banned here. The administration was approached by Iran and asked if they would put the MEK on the list of foreign terrorist organizations. It was done, regrettably, by President Clinton as an accommodation to Iran because he thought it would help improve relations and would kind of smooth things over. Of course, that worked brilliantly, right? And I still couldn't get over the fact that this organization that I was speaking up for, that espoused democracy, a nuclear-free country, rights for women, everything the United States stood for was on a list of foreign terrorist organizations. So we consulted with some lawyers and decided we would sue to get them off. Brought a lawsuit in Washington, D.C. I'm ashamed to have to admit in the privacy of this room that that lawsuit took rather a bit longer than you folks took to get the ban on the demonstration lifted. It took until at least a year or more. And I thought as soon as we filed the complaint, the State Department would react by saying, oh, well, we did this a while ago, and it was a mistake. But they didn't. They, through the Justice Department, mounted a ferocious defense and backed down only when the Court of Appeals in D.C., it wasn't even the district court, it was the Court of Appeals in D.C., said that by a certain date, they would have to come up with evidence justifying the placement of the MEK on the list of foreign terrorist organizations. Now understand, this isn't just some list that is kept for bureaucratic purposes in Washington. It has, as Lincoln suggested, a very practical effect. People couldn't give money to the MEK. The MEK couldn't function in the United States, where there's a huge Iranian American community. People had to be careful of who they spoke to and what they said. I had to be careful, so I thought. For 15 years, until finally, in 2012, we got the ban lifted. And interestingly, it was one of the people who I guess was resisting this, was the then Secretary of State, who was the wife of the president who had originally put the MEK on the list of foreign terrorist organizations. I guess the arc of justice occasionally, the arc of history does occasionally bend toward justice, and that was poetic justice if ever there was any. But I don't want anybody here to lose faith in the possibility that governments can work effectively, even the United States government. In some ways, there's no such thing as the United States government. They're just a bunch of people. Some of them are highly dedicated, highly intelligent, and highly principled, and some of them are none of the above. Some of them are Robert Malley. I wasn't going to mention any names during this, but that one was just irresistible. They strive to do what they can. I've met a couple of them even at the State Department, and I'm certainly not going to mention those names because they get in trouble. But they're still there, and they're still working effectively. I think the lesson to be learned is that if you keep at it the way you did here in Paris, the way we did in getting the MEK off the list, you can prevail. Sometimes things look bleak. We have a bill passed Congress barring any agreement, basically any repeat of the JCPOA. No more JCPOA, according to Congress. So the current administration wants to conclude an understanding that's not in writing. I guess I'd love to have been present at the meeting at which that strategy was hit on. Somebody must have said, well, if we conclude an agreement with the Iranians, it's not worth the paper it's written on. I mean, look, the Israelis seized an archive in 2018 that proves the Iranians have never adhered to any treaty, even the JCPOA. So how could we conclude an agreement with them? Somebody else says, I got it. Let's not have a written agreement. Let's just have an oral agreement. That way, there won't be any paper for it not to be worth. Anyway, I suggest to you that when, as Senator Lieberman indicated, when Congress gets going on this, they will not take it lightly, and hell hath no fury like a Congress made fools of, and they will not suffer it. That understanding is going to be a long way from fruition. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you. And as you know, the same result happened with an EU trial, a UK trial, and the trial here in France. All four, including the United States, concluded that there was no evidence of terrorism or intent for terrorism with the MEK. They all came to the same conclusion. And for another time, there are implications. Even if you should never have been on the list, once you've been on it, there are immigration conclusions that chase you for the rest of your life unless something is done. But thank you for that review.
There are also public relations conclusions, because a large number of people in the media, when they come upon a subject, don't really do research. They just read the clips. And so you will constantly see the MEK referred to as formally on the terrorism list. Since there was no reason to put them on in the first place, why is that? Because it's in the clips. We have to fight against that with every ounce of diligence that's in it.
You talked about how the NCRI and the MEK got off the terrorism list. Is there legislation that could be conceived of in the United States that would have a salutary effect, perhaps to right the wrong that was done to people who were never terrorists, perhaps to make it harder for the regime to operate, perhaps to expose known agents of influence if they could be identified and exposed? What could be done legally and legislatively in your estimation?
Well, two things. One, committees of Congress can hold hearings that expose known agents of influence, and that is an important thing to do. Secondly, the Congress could pass a joint resolution, hopefully unanimously, that declares that there is not now and never has been any basis for saying that MEK NCRI is a terrorist organization, period. And I think that would go a long way toward not only undoing the wrong, but also telling the American people where the future lies in Iran, and telling them where we have to go.